life is going to test you. You know, people will piss you off and disappoint you. Plans will fall apart. Challenges will come and go. It's called life. But the quality of your life won't be determined by what happens to you. It will be determined by how you control your emotional state. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 major shifts that emotionally intelligent people use, shifts that I've used in my life, myself personally, and how you can learn to stay calm, confident, and in control, even when life feels like it's falling apart. And I know this because I've lived it, and I'm sure some of you watching this have as well. And one of the biggest challenges that I actually went through in my life happened only a few years ago when I went through a tough, rough, amicable divorce. And I felt emotionally drained and exhausted. I was just spent. And that event had a large psychological effect on me because not only did I have an impact on my mental and physical state, but it also reopened the lid of my suppressed emotions and feelings that I had when my father passed away a long time ago when I was 11 years old. You see, I had these abandonment issues. My father had passed away and left me. That's how I felt. That's what I thought. And now this was happening all over again with my family. You know, and all these emotions and feelings resurfaced, and my confidence had seriously taken a hit. And most mornings I didn't even want to get out of bed. I was depressed, I was angry, I was sad. I felt total shame, and you name it. I had felt this whole range of emotions. They just raised their ugly head. But when the dust started to settle, which it eventually slowly but surely did, I actually realized something profoundly important. And that was that it wasn't so much my situation and circumstances that were destroying me. Yes, they were tough, and anyone that goes through a divorce or separation, it's tough. Even if it's amicable, even if you both agree on it, it's still going to be tough, especially if there's kids involved. But the reality was that it was my emotional reactions to those situations and circumstances. And it was that realization that led me to discover this first shift. And that was learning to become the observer of what was happening, becoming aware of what was happening. I started looking at myself and the situation from a different perspective. You know, I kind of stood back and asked myself, why am I reacting this way? Not why is this happening to me? Not who's responsible. But why am I reacting this way? And it was that question that forced me to become aware of something I'd never really looked at before. I realized that the events themselves weren't creating all of my suffering. It was my thoughts, my perceptions, my suppressed emotions and feelings that were creating the suffering. You know, and I can hear some of you say, yeah, but Justin, you've got every right to feel like shit. And I did, and everyone does in the same situation. It was fucking hard. But the problem was that I kept on replaying the old stories in my mind. Stories that I'd lost everything and would never recover. You know, stories that my future was ruined. That's it. Stories that I wasn't enough and that I would never get ahead. And every time I believed those stories, my emotional state actually got worse. But the more aware I became of my thoughts, the more I began to understand that the awareness creates a choice. You know, I could choose a different perspective, even if I couldn't see it because it was a shit time. The reality was I could choose a different perspective. I could choose a different meaning. I could choose a different response to what was going on. And I started doing that, you know, and that didn't magically solve my problems overnight. Believe me, it does take time. But it gave me back something I thought I'd lost. And that was a small sliver of hope, a sliver of faith. And today, whenever I feel slightly frustrated or anxious or overwhelmed, you know, I still ask myself that same question. Why am I reacting this way? Could there be a better way to react? You know, can what I'm thinking and feeling emotionally at this point in time be any other way? Is everything that I'm thinking true? Can the situation change? Because the reality is that behind every emotional reaction, there's a belief, a fear, or a false story or narrative that you keep telling yourself or selling to yourself that's more than likely false. And sometimes the biggest breakthrough in your life doesn't come from changing your circumstances. It actually comes from being open-minded and facing your fears, changing your thoughts, challenging your thoughts about what is, and becoming aware of what's happening inside you, inside this trickster mind, even when it feels like shit and it feels like as though life is going against you, and it will at times. That's just the way life is. In fact, that's when you need to do it the most, because that's where real growth and change begins. But the reality is that awareness alone isn't enough, because most people make a mistake that actually makes their emotions worse. And that leads me on to shift number 2. And that's stop fighting your emotions. I mean, have you ever noticed that the more you try not to feel something, the stronger it becomes? The more you try not to feel anxious, the more anxious you become. The more you try not to feel hurt, the more pain follows you around. For years I thought that the solution was to fight my emotions. I'd distract myself and pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. But here's what I eventually discovered. You can't heal what you refuse to feel. And a lot of people do that. They think, they suppress their emotions. But most people aren't processing their emotions. They're just, like I said, suppressing them. And that's what I did when my father passed away. And I bottled it in within me for years, 20, 30 years. And it didn't do me any good, I can tell you that. And there's a huge difference. Suppression is when you push an emotion down and pretend it isn't there. You pretend it didn't happen. Whereas processing is when you allow yourself to feel it without becoming it. I mean, think about that for a moment. An emotion is simply energy moving through your body. It's temporary. But when you resist it, suppress it, judge it or fight it, you keep it alive. You keep it alive inside you. And that's what I did. All my emotions at first, I wanted them all gone. But eventually I stopped asking myself, how do I get rid of this feeling? And I started asking myself, what is this feeling trying to show me? What haven't I accepted yet and let go of? And that changed everything. So instead of running from the emotion, I became curious about it. I just sat with it. I felt it. I observed it. And something interesting began to happen. The emotion began to lose its grip on me. Because emotions want to be acknowledged, not avoided. So if you're constantly reacting to life, stop fighting what you're feeling. Pause, take a breath. Allow the emotion to be there, but don't fight it. Just be with it. Observe it. Observe it without judgment. Because the moment you stop resisting your emotions is often the moment they begin to pass through you. And that's where real emotional freedom begins. That's when it starts. And this leads me to a skill that changed my life more than any other. And it's the one that most people completely overlook. And that's shift number 3, emotional mastery. How I became emotionally strong for life. I used to think being emotionally strong meant not feeling anything, not getting hurt, not getting upset, not letting life affect me. Being staunch. But life taught me something very different. Over the years, I've gone through a lot of shit. Separation, financial struggles, loneliness, you name it. Insecurity. I felt like everything in my life was falling apart. And if I'm honest, there were times when I was completely overwhelmed and I didn't want to be here. And I think we've all gone through that. I didn't want to unlive myself, but I didn't want to be here. Especially when I lived by myself for the first time in my life. And honestly, I was scared as hell. But looking back, those difficult experiences taught me a lot. And it wasn't because the pain disappeared. It was because my relationships with myself and the pain changed. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned was this. Emotional strength isn't about controlling life, because you can never control life 100%. That's not the way it is. It's about controlling your emotional response to life. I realized that most of my suffering wasn't coming from the events themselves. It was actually coming from the meaning I was giving to those events. The story I was telling myself, the worst case scenarios I was imagining, the fear about what might happen next, the catastrophizing. But once I became aware of that, everything started to shift. So instead of reacting automatically, I started observing myself. When I felt angry, I asked myself, why am I angry? I mean, there's reasons to be angry, but why am I letting it affect me so much? When I felt anxious, I got curious. When I felt hurt, I stopped running from it and allowed myself to process it. And once I started doing this over time, something incredible began to happen. The things that used to break me or piss me off started making me stronger. I stopped expecting life to be easy because it's not easy. I stopped needing everything to go my way. And I started trusting myself to handle whatever came next to my life. I started to trust the process of life. And that's what emotional strength really is. It's knowing that no matter what happens, you'll find a way through it. You'll be okay. And it's not because life is predictable, because it's not. But because you've built the inner strength to face uncertainty. And that's what life is. It's uncertain. So today I still have all these challenges. There's new ones every day, every week, every month. And the same thing will be with you. They will never stop. Life is all about change. It's the way it is. It's called living on planet Earth. I still experience difficult emotions, but they no longer control me as much anymore. Because the reality is, emotional mastery isn't in the absence of emotion. It's the ability to remain centered while experiencing it. And that's a true skill. It's a real skill. It can change your life forever. And it can definitely happen with the right mental internal training and guidance. Listen, thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I read every one. Maybe it resonated with you, one of these topics somewhere. And if you're committed to becoming mentally stronger, emotionally resilient, and creating a better life yourself, make sure you like and subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is about. And if you'd like to continue this journey with me with some one-on-one coaching, please click on the link in the description below. I have a free 5-day coaching program. No strings attached. Free 5-day coaching one-on-one with me. Just a friendly chat. Just book it in with a click on the link below. Peace out. See you in the next video. By the way, watch the next video here first. It's what YouTube wants you to watch. Peace out. See you soon.